Tilde. Today I'm going to answer a question. More correctly, I'm going to answer a question twice, since I've already answered this question in the comments section of the video where this question was asked, but then I thought, hang on a minute, this is actually something that's quite interesting, because it kind of tangentially relates to a topic which I've talked about before, and that is persuasive redefinition, and how words and labels can be changed or altered in some capacity to very subtly change their meaning. And in answering this question, it also touches upon something which has been mentioned around and about to the internet in the general anti-social justice sphere. And that is people taking the victimhood of others onto themselves so that they then claim the victim status in a situation where they are not the victim. So this question was posted by a YouTuber named Noel Plum, a person that I highly recommend you subscribe to if you enjoy people digging into all of the numbers behind certain topics. So I'll just let the question portion of his video play out, it's only a minute or so long, and then I'll give what I consider to be at least part of the answer to it, or at least my hypothesis on what the answer could be. Let's go.
What is this? This is what I want to know, right? And I'm addressing this mainly to people who would either typically be called an SJW, a social justice warrior, who might even use that label for themselves, right? That they're an SJW, right? What is this SJew shit all about? I'm reading this more and more, and there's an example, look, of somebody using it with regard to me, and I understand how these things work, right? I understand. Because I'm pretty cynical that generally there's some spin and manipulation involved in nearly every label that's applied, right, to political and socio-political subjects. And when a label is manipulated like this from SJW to SJew, there's a reason for it, right? But I don't know what that reason is. What I know is it's used in the context of saying that you're the kind of person who hates SJews, or you're against SJews, or you don't like SJews, or you can't stand SJews. And I just want to know what is being implied with that, because I'm kind of concerned that perhaps there's some kind of equivalence being suggested here between anti-Semitism and a hatred of the Jewish people and having issues with social justice warriorism. And if that is the case, I kind of find that a little bit distasteful. So I just want to know, is that what it's about? Or is there something else, and actually it's nothing anywhere near as bad as that? So what is it about? Just let me know. SJews, what do you mean by that?
So that was the question and some of Noel's preliminary thoughts around and about this label and what it could possibly be implying. Now, skimming through the comments on this video, I noticed a little bit of a pattern, and that was quite a few people saying that the first time they'd ever heard this term, SJew, was from that Reasonable Questions for Anti-SJW video that the general FemSoc Just Brigade mirrored all around their sphere of the YouTubes. And they also mentioned that the person in that video that they first heard this phrase SJew from was H-Bomber-Guy. You know, that guy who pretends to be poor by shooting all of his videos in his garage, and spends his time prancing around in a Sonic the Hedgehog costume. Because, you know, that's normal and not in any way cringe-inducing. So it would seem to be that the first instance that most people have heard this term SJew is from this clip.
If SJews are bad because they spend too much time whining and don't talk about real problems, then why aren't you talking about those problems instead of just whining about the other people over and over and over for literally years?
So while this may not be the very first utterance of the phrase, it does seem to be a lot of people's first exposure to the phrase. So what is H-Bomber-Guy's reason for using the phrase SJew? Well, very conveniently, someone asked him on his Ask FM page, and he provided his reasoning, which is apparently as follows. Question: why do you say SJWs? Answer: to remind people that this isn't the first time a bunch of weirdos have invented a vague group of bad people they then have to stop. So clearly he's thinking back to a time when Jewish people were maligned by another group, and that other group of people were determined to stop the Jews. And given the fact that various social justice, feminist, and other leftist organizations, given that one of their current tactics is to call literally anyone who disagrees with them a fascist or a Nazi, I think that it's not a massive leap of logic to suggest that he is connecting the two. Indeed, reading some of the answers in Noel's comment section, quite a lot of other people have made this connection as well. And I do think that one particular comment here really hits the nail on the head, when they say that this is victimocracy at its finest. Quote, "We're hated by modern Nazis like Jews were hated by World War II Nazis," end quote. And I do believe that that is quite a large part of the explanation, if not the entire explanation, for the use of the term SJW. This is a group of people who do seem to widely believe that the majority of people, if not all people who disagree with them, are actual Nazis. And there seems to be some sort of bizarre link in their mind to the whole Donald Trump presidency as proof of fascism and white supremacy, and then these social justice types assuming, incorrectly I would add, that they are some sort of oppressed minority, despite of course the overwhelming hold that their worldview has in things like the court system and academia. But because they genuinely believe that they live in a white supremacist Nazi society, and this white supremacist Nazi society that we supposedly live in disagrees with their worldview, that makes them the equivalent of Jewish people within the Nazi Reich. Despite the fact, of course, that there is no parallel whatsoever between the two. These people are still legally allowed to own property. They haven't been forced out of their jobs or their homes by the government. They're not required to wear in public any sort of symbol or sign that denotes what they are. There's no state agreements attempting to encourage them to leave the country. And perhaps most obviously, they're not being rounded up, forced into camps, or executed for their mere existence. It really does seem to be yet another example of these people exploiting the victim status of others and attempting to garner all of that sympathy for themselves. They are taking their place in society and attempting to claim that it is the equal of the popular image of Jews in any sort of Nazi-controlled area. And of course, it still carries with it the connotation that anyone who disagrees with them is a Nazi, which is of course their favourite go-to words to try and instantly discredit people, because it's largely reliant on the generally accepted public bad will towards National Socialism. Don't bother dealing with any sort of argument or explanation or anything along those lines, just slap people with a label that the majority of society doesn't like, kick back, and fellate yourself for your self-asserted moral superiority. It all falls quite neatly into a pattern that we've seen over a number of years. People in positions of authority and power often making very large sums of money, not just trying to champion the rights of others or be a prominent figure for the rights of others, but trying to actively claim that they are massively oppressed or discriminated against. Like the poor oppressed systematically discriminated against people who go to speak at the UN, are given hundreds of thousands of dollars a year on top of anything that they happen to make, and those poor oppressed people who are children of billionaires, the sorts of people who will tell us that money does not equal privilege, which is very convenient for them while they sit lecturing you on social justice while they're rocking a Rolex watch. Or walking through their nice, big, bright, airy, pristine condition middle-class houses, lecturing us about why we need to overthrow the bourgeoisie, without a single hint of irony or even a moment of self-reflection to realize that they would be one of the first people to have all of their stuff forcefully redistributed. So that's pretty much my take on the topic. The whole SJWs calling themselves SJWs thing is just another excuse for a bunch of people who are pretty well off to try and appropriate the victimhood of others, or in some cases just the asserted or perceived victimhood of others. And then of course that is combined with a good portion of what I suppose would basically amount to nothing more than name-calling. But I do think that Noel's initial thought, which was,
because I'm kind of concerned that perhaps there's some kind of equivalence being suggested here between anti-Semitism and a hatred of the Jewish people and having issues with social justice warriorism.
I think that interpretation is pretty accurate, but that with a little bit of extra framing and reference to things which have happened, and patterns of behaviour that we know this sort of people engage in, that there's just a little bit extra going on behind the scenes with it. So hopefully that's given a little bit of an answer, or at least my interpretation of the whole thing, but it'll be interesting to see what some other people's interpretation is of this. Or if there was indeed any instance of this term SJW being used before that Reasonable Questions video, and used by someone who had specifically given an explanation of why they were using that term. Hopefully that's given everyone a bit of food for thought, and it'll be interesting to see what grows out of this.